For joining us for today's webinar, an overview of the 2019-2020 Municipal Land Use Regulation survey results. My name is Noah Hodgetts, and I am an assistant planner in the planning division at the New Hampshire Office of Strategic Initiatives. Over the next hour, I will take you through the results of the 2019-2020 Municipal Land Use Regulation, MLUR for short, survey results, and also provide a tutorial on how to use the survey results interactive viewer. There will also be time for questions at the end. You can ask questions during the presentation by clicking on the chat icon in the ribbon at the bottom of your screen, outlined in red on the left side, which will open the meeting chat on the right side of your web browser. And then you can type in your questions in the box at the bottom of the meeting chat, outlined here in red, which I will answer at the conclusion of the presentation. This diagram shows to have any kind of land use regulation, a community first needs to establish a planning board. Planning boards are required to adopt a master plan, which, as stated in RSA 674-1, purpose is to guide the future development of the municipality. Zoning ordinances are supposed to support the goals and objectives of the master plan, but this, as you may know, does not always occur. Note that while we think of New Hampshire as a home rule state, in New Hampshire, local jurisdictions can only adopt regulations which state statute has expressly given them the authority to enact. RSA 675-9 establishes the New Hampshire Office of Strategic Initiatives, OSI, as the state repository for all local land use regulations and documents, including master plans, zoning ordinances, historic districts ordinances, capital improvement plans, building codes, subdivision regulations, and site plan review regulations, as well as driveway regulations, excavation regulations, and wireless telecommunications ordinances. RSA 675-9 also authorizes OSI to conduct an annual survey of all municipalities in order to collect information pertaining to new and or amended land use ordinances. The 2019 survey was completed by all but 5 of the state's 234 municipalities, as well as 9 village districts with zoning authority, and Coos County, which has zoning authority over 23 unincorporated places in the North Country. For the 5 communities that did not return their 2019 survey, OSI reviewed their 2019 annual report and 2020 town meeting warrant and added applicable information on their behalf to the survey results. Livermore, an unincorporated place in Grafton County, and Hales Location, an unincorporated place in Carroll County, are not included in this survey, as no entity has local land use regulation or zoning authority over them. In addition, 130 communities submitted zoning amendment updates after their annual 2020 annual town meetings last spring. We'll begin collecting responses for the 2021 survey in late May/early June 2021 after the conclusion of all 2021 annual town meetings. A copy of the 2019 MLUR survey is shown on the right. The 2019 survey covered many different topics, including municipal planning organizational structure, land use regulations and documents, master plan topics, housing information, building code information, economic development, planning and development techniques, water and shoreland regulations, and energy information. As there are 100+ variables in the full survey, I will not be able to touch on all these topics in the survey during this webinar. But if you have questions about specific topics that I don't mention during the presentation, please feel free to ask them in the meeting chat, and I will try to do my best to address them at the end of the presentation. Aside from the usual definition changes and other routine zoning amendments passed to make sure municipal zoning ordinances are consistent with recent state statute changes, 2020 was a year in which communities passed a slew of other zoning changes ranging from wetland conservation ordinance updates to sign ordinance changes. Overall, 130 communities, representing 60% of municipalities, adopted zoning amendment updates in 2020, the vast majority of which were adopted through the annual town meeting process. Of particular note, in 2020, 10 communities amended their accessory dwelling unit ADU ordinances to allow detached units. 4 communities adopted or expanded their workforce housing ordinances. 11 communities adopted short-term rental regulations. 17 communities adopted definitions for solar arrays or solar energy systems ordinance. And 4 communities adopted 79E, which provides property tax relief to encourage investment in rehabilitation of underutilized buildings in downtowns and town centers. While 18 communities located primarily in Grafton and Coos County do not have traditional zoning ordinances, only 2 communities at the far northern tip of the state, Pittsburgh and Clarksville, do not have a planning board established under RSA 673-1. The survey included those municipalities that lack traditional zoning ordinances, as several have other types of land use regulations, including residential subdivision regulations, non-residential site plan review regulations, a wireless telecommunications ordinance, sign regulations, and or a drinking water protection ordinance. 8 communities that lack a traditional zoning ordinance have a zoning board of adjustment established under RSA 673-1 to administer appeals of these above mentioned other types of land use regulations. Several of the municipalities that lack traditional zoning ordinances are also communities in the National Flood Insurance Program and have separate flood development ordinances, which are tracked by our office's state floodplain management program, separate from this survey. 197 communities have adopted a wireless telecommunications ordinance, with the only communities that have not adopted such an ordinance clustered at the northern tip of the state or on the western edge in low population, densely forested areas, in areas and communities that have likely never had to contend with the siting of a cellular communications tower in their community. Municipal planning capacity also varies greatly throughout the state, with the highest concentration of full-time planners located in the southern and eastern sections of the state. Not surprisingly, there's a clear correlation between communities that have more planning capacity and the number and complexity of the innovative planning tools that they have adopted. For example, Portsmouth, Dover, and Londonderry have adopted and utilized more innovative planning tools than any other community throughout the state. 31 communities have adopted master plan updates since the beginning of 2021, with an increasing number adopting master plan chapters, which deviate from the 17 master plan chapters enumerated in RSA 674-2. Such new emerging master plan topics include broadband, community health, agriculture, climate change, and the arts. The map on the right shows the decade in which a community's master plan was last updated. Communities in red and purple have the oldest master plans, while communities in blue and green have the most recently updated plans, anywhere from 2010 to current. And we'll go through some of this data in map form at the conclusion of this part of the presentation. And again, a reminder, if folks have questions, feel free to enter them in the meeting chat box on the right, which you can access by hovering over your screen and hitting the little chat icon. Among New Hampshire's 234 municipalities, 70 communities explicitly allow workforce housing, including 27 communities who have workforce housing multifamily overlay districts. In accordance with the state's workforce housing law, RSA 674, 58 to 61. The majority of the communities that have adopted workforce housing ordinances are located in southern New Hampshire and on the seacoast, as well as in the Mount Washington Valley, where housing cost pressures are the greatest. However, only 48 of these communities have an inclusionary zoning clause or ordinance in their workforce housing ordinance, which allows a developer to construct units at a greater density than otherwise allowed in exchange for setting aside a set percentage of units, usually between 10 and 20% as affordable. At the same time, many of these same communities in southern New Hampshire and the seacoast also levy impact fees. 86 communities, and or have enacted growth management ordinances, 23 communities. 78 communities also employ age-restricted housing regulations, which typically limit residential development in certain areas to persons over age 55 or 62. In 2020, several suburban communities repealed or limited the incentives for workforce housing. A handful of suburban and rural communities also passed expanded workforce housing related ordinances in 2020. Hopkinton created a new commerce and community overlay district in the West Hopkinton area to help incentivize more affordable housing and mixed-use development in a formerly underutilized industrialized area of the town, which was a result of the town's recent involvement in Plan New Hampshire's Municipal Technical Assistance Grant Program. Conway also passed an affordable housing ordinance, which provides density bonuses for developments which include at least 25% workforce housing on lots served by municipal water and sewer. And several other large urban communities also adopted zoning changes that encourage mixed-use, higher density development and workforce housing in their downtowns, including Dover, Exeter, Farmington, and Rochester. Other noteworthy findings include that 202 communities adopted a provision in their zoning ordinance regulating accessory dwelling units, ADUs, since RSA 674, 71 through 73 went into effect on June 1st, 2017, which was an increase of 8 communities from the 2018 survey. RSA 671 to 73 requires communities that have adopted a zoning ordinance to allow ADUs in single-family residential zoning districts as of right by special exception or conditional use permit to encourage the development of additional housing on single-family house lots. However, of these 202 communities, 169 communities require the principal dwelling unit or the unit to be owner-occupied, and only 96 communities allow accessory dwelling units in structures which are detached from the principal dwelling unit. Just under half of the communities that regulate accessory dwelling units permit them as of right, while the other half obtain a conditional use permit or special exception. The map on the right, of course, shows communities in red that only allow attached accessory dwelling units. All the communities in green allow both attached and detached accessory dwelling units. With the explosion of short-term rentals in recent years in areas of the state popular with tourists, including the Mount Washington Valley, White Mountain National Forest area, as well as the seacoast, in 2020, many communities sought to catch up with this trend. Specifically, in 2020, 11 communities added definitions for short-term rentals or short-term rental regulations, more than doubling the number of communities that regulate short-term rentals, bringing the number of communities with short-term rental regulations to 20. Communities that added language pertaining to short-term rentals to their zoning ordinance in 2020 include Canterbury, Conway, Dublin, Hanover, Jackson, Laconia, Lincoln, Littleton, Seabrook, Thornton, and Whitefield. And on this map, you can see that communities in the pink only allow short-term rentals. This map is also showing communities in that kind of darker red that allow tiny houses, and communities in light blue that allow have both regulations pertaining to short-term rentals as well as tiny houses. More and more communities are also adopting comprehensive solar energy systems ordinances to regulate roof and ground-mounted solar arrays. In 2020, 17 communities adopted definitions for solar arrays or a solar energy systems ordinance, which was a near 60% increase in the number of communities regulating solar arrays from previous years, bringing the number of communities with solar regulations to 48. As the size and complexity of solar arrays has grown in recent years, communities have increasingly adopted comprehensive solar energy systems ordinances, which address everything from lot coverage and buffers to decommissioning. And this map is showing, which we'll again go through an interactive map viewer in a few minutes, is showing communities that only allow or regulate rooftop solar arrays in yellow, maybe showing up as green on your screen. Just one or two of those. Communities that are only regulating ground-mounted arrays in light blue, and communities that regulate both ground-mounted and roof-mounted solar arrays in orange, which is the vast majority of communities that regulate solar arrays. Through the lens of how communities can utilize innovative planning techniques to address demand for additional housing and incentivize infill development in already developed areas, while also trying to protect environmentally sensitive areas. Here are a list of planning tools to consider, which I'm not going to go through in depth right now, but include mixed-use zoning, inclusionary zoning, density bonuses, cluster development, otherwise known as open space residential development, form-based codes, accessory dwelling unit ordinances, which I touched on earlier, planned unit development, transfer of development rights, and village plan alternative subdivision. The number next to each planning tool refers to the number of communities which have adopted such a tool according to the 2019 survey. For example, 140 communities have adopted some form of mixed-use zoning. We note that Dover is the only community to adopt all of these planning tools, followed by Portsmouth, which has adopted all but a village plan alternative subdivision ordinance, and Londonderry, which has adopted all but a form-based code and village plan alternative subdivision. Hanover and Lyme have also adopted all but village plan alternative subdivisions, transfer development rights, and a form-based code. Now, as this presentation demonstrates, based on the survey results, many communities across the Granite State are utilizing innovative planning and zoning approaches to meet their community's current needs while planning proactively for the future. However, challenges remain, including making sure communities are aware of innovative planning tools available to them, have the needed resources and adequate capacity to both adopt and administer them, making the development community aware that a community has adopted these innovative planning tools, and encouraging development community and others to utilize these tools. For example, while 8 communities have transfer of development ordinances, a great tool to encourage development in infill locations, while also protecting land in more rural and environmentally sensitive areas, Dover is the only community that actively encourages use of this tool. Now, data from the Municipal Land Use Regulation Survey is available from several different formats on the OSI MLUR survey webpage, which can be found at https://www.NHOSI.gov planning/OSI/services/land-use-survey.htm. And I'm also going to put a copy of this link in the meeting chat, and hopefully you'll all be able to see that. That was highlighted. Let me put an unhighlighted version so it should be easier to see. My apologies. And on this website, it includes an article summarizing the results of the 2019-2020 Municipal Land Use Regulation Survey, an interactive map, a community-by-community snapshot, as well as subject-specific tables. The summary article, titled "The State of Local Land Use Regulations in New Hampshire 2020 Update," goes into greater detail about many of the topics, including 79E, community revitalization tax relief incentive, mixed-use zoning, and open space residential cluster development, to name a few other topics, which we don't have time to discuss today in detail. Each item, as I mentioned a little earlier, contained in the MLUR survey has also been mapped by topic in the MLUR interactive map, which we're going to demo in a minute. The land use regulation documents category, shown here, contains live hyperlinks to each community's updated land use regulations and documents, including capital improvement plans, driveway regulations, excavation regulations, historic district ordinances, master plans, site plan review regulations, subdivision regulations, wireless telecommunications ordinances, and zoning ordinances. For example, this map is showing is open to the city of Concord, and is showing Concord zoning ordinance was last updated on July 13th, 2020, or at least that was when our office at least received the last updated version of Concord zoning ordinance. And by clicking on view here, highlighted in red in the bottom row labeled URL, will bring you directly to Concord's current zoning ordinance. The community by community snapshot shows the complete survey results for each community, sorted by topic as organized on the survey, starting with person's contact information who completed the survey, municipal planning organizational structure, a detailing the different land use board types, from planning and zoning boards to conservation commissions to historic district commissions. And then it details the different land use regulation types and documents, all of which I just went through, and includes links to each of these, which have hyperlinks, so you should be able to go to them directly. It then includes a section on master plan topics, organized by the master plan chapters enumerated in state statute. It then goes over a bunch of questions related to housing, about ADUs, workforce housing ordinances, short-term rentals. There's then a question about building codes, if the community locally enforces the state building code. There's then several questions about economic development, including whether the community has adopted the community revitalization tax relief incentive program for their community, for a district in their community, 79E, whether they've adopted tax increment financing, TIF, whether they have any kind of economic development organizational infrastructure, like if they have an economic development staff person, economic development committee, or a downtown revitalization committee. Then we get to the planning, the planning and development techniques, which is a to Z list of various planning techniques that communities utilize, many of which are authorized by state statute, ranging from architectural design standards to density bonuses, impact fees, planned unit development, transfer of development rights, village plan, alternative subdivisions, etc. Finally, there's two other sections which we, OSI, don't use as much ourselves, or the planning division, I should say, does not use as much, but we collect information on water and shoreland regulations for the Department of Environmental Services, including information on groundwater and aquifer protection ordinances, shoreland protection ordinances, surface water protection ordinances, as well as watershed protection ordinances. Then there's a couple of questions related to energy, which is used more for the energy half of our office, including solar energy systems ordinances, small wind energy systems ordinances, outdoor wood-fired hydronic heater ordinances. So as you can see, the survey covers quite a diverse topic area. It's hard to go into detail on topics because we're covering such a wide area. As you'll see, as you can see on this community by community snapshot, we do ask a couple more specific questions for a couple questions, including about ADUs. How are they allowed? Are they allowed as of right, by special exception, or conditional use permit? And we also ask a couple more specific questions for some of the water and shoreline regulations about how big the buffers or setbacks are. I wish we could ask more detailed questions. I know a number of you have, written to me inquiring about if OSI collects information on, specific building setbacks or other dimensional requirements. But the reality is that when we're trying to cover so many topics, it's just, and everybody only has a limited amount of time to complete such a survey, we have to kind of keep it at a pretty high 2,000 foot level and not get into that much detail. So the next data product I'm going to touch on is the subject-specific tables. A list of available subject-specific tables is available on the OSI MLUR survey website based on the order each question is presented on the survey. The tables are available in both Excel and CSV formats, as you can see here. And so by clicking on a link, and we'll go through a little tutorial again, you'll see it'll bring up one of these tables. What you're seeing on the right is what one of these tables, one of the Excel files would look like, showing communities with solar energy ordinances. Now, before I transition to the second part of the webinar, the tutorial part of the webinar, I'm going to pause to answer any questions you may have. So feel free, if folks have questions, and I'll give you a couple minutes to ask any questions, to enter them into the chat box at this time. And again, for people, they were just to get a question, but for folks that aren't seeing the chat box come up, if you just kind of hover over the screen, you should see a little chat box come up. And if you click on that icon and then you move your, you should see a little box at the bottom that says type a new message. So we just got a question from Lou. It says, are solar energy ordinances usually directed to PV solar, or they also address hot water solar? That's a really good question. Quite honestly, that is a question that is more detailed than I am familiar with on the surface. I would say that what I have seen is that the vast majority of ordinances are focused on PV or photovoltaic, the actual traditional arrays for generating electricity versus the kind of thermal arrays that would be used to heat solar thermal. That's not to say that you couldn't use a solar array to a solar ordinance to also address solar hot water as well. I just got another question from Kyle. Says, my community is interested in creating design or performance standards for agricultural uses within their site plan regulations. The goal is to create thresholds on when and when not to regulate types of activities based on size and impacts. Are there any communities in New Hampshire to look at? So again, this is pretty detailed question asking about design or performance standards specific to agricultural uses. Again, what I can say is that we don't have a question that details communities with performance standards for agricultural uses. We do have a general question on the survey about communities that have general performance standards. I will say that the vast number of communities that have performance standards are usually related to wireless telecommunications ordinances or small wind energy systems ordinances that have to do with regulating noise, glare, that kind of thing. So unfortunately, Kyle, I do not have a more specific, better answer for you. Sylvia says, it's difficult to see the maps and tables. If time allows, can you run through an example of how to find these on your website and how to find a specific map on the interactive map? Yes, Sylvia, we are going to be doing that momentarily. I just wanted to try to get to some of the more substantive questions before we moved to the second part of the webinar, which is going to be doing exactly that, going through a tutorial. My apologies for the map and tables not showing up great in this format. Jean asks, how can I find conservation commissions are empowered to review that impact natural resources as listed in their inventory of natural resources, not just wetlands, shorelands, and associated buffers? So Jean, again, that is a good question. As I mentioned at the outset, this is a question that, as I said, because we're really at the 2,000 foot level of kind of surveying different information, we don't actually have a details on conservation commissions and if they have a natural resource inventory, an NRI or not. I wish we had room for a question like that. We simply do not. I think for very specific questions like this, I think other good resources are, the New Hampshire Association of Conservation Commissions. I don't know if they may have a more detailed resource on something like that. Ivy, I think, is referring back to Kyle's earlier question, saying that Peterborough does have standards having to do accessory commercial agricultural activities like weddings. Rick Milner said to also check out the New Hampshire Department of Agricultural best management practices for agricultural performance standards based on the type of agriculture. So any other questions before we move to the tutorial part of the webinar? We can always feel free to, people can ask additional questions as well as we're going through that. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to move on to the, Tim Murphy just asked, how about communities that have adopted complete streets ordinances? Yes, Tim, we do have a question about that. I will pull that up on the survey, excuse me, on the interactive map when we get to that in a minute. Tim, this probably won't surprise you, but a lot of those communities are in your region. All right. So let's move on now to the second part, because I want to try to keep this to an hour. I know everybody has other things to get to this afternoon. So we're now going to turn to the tutorial part of the webinar. So if you want to follow along, I'm going to type, if you happen to have a second screen, or you could probably just open a second window in your browser, and shouldn't lose this as well. There's the link for the interactive map that you can take you there. So if you copy that in, if you want to follow along, I'm going to do it as well. We're going to try to focus on answering this question or problem statement as kind of a illustration of attempt to kind of walk you through a tutorial of how to use the interactive viewer. So the question is, if I'm a planning board member working on developing a new solar energy systems ordinance, how can you find a map and or list of communities with solar ordinances that you can review? The solution would be to use the MLUR Survey Interactive Map Viewer in combination with the subject-specific data highlighted in the previous slide. The process that I'm going to outline for obtaining this information is the same for other inquiries, such as a Conservation Commission seeking information on communities with municipal wetland regulations, or an RPC seeking information on communities with complete street policies. So as I just said a second ago, I've copied the interactive map viewer link as well into the meeting box. Nate Abbott points out that I also, there's also a link to General Municipal Land Use Regulation survey page, which I discussed earlier. So that is that. So let's go into the tutorial now. It's got to switch screens here, so just give me a moment. So hopefully everybody can see the interactive map. Does somebody just want to type if they're able to see the interactive map? If they haven't opened their own window, can they see your interactive map now showing up on the screen? Yes. Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you. All right, great. So once we've opened up the interactive map, we're going to begin by expanding the energy information topic layer here. And then we're going to scroll down on the layer list and click the eye next to the layer that says solar energy systems. It may take up for the layer to actually turn on your end. Hopefully it's showing up now. So now you can see like that same picture of this map in the slide. You should be able to see a little and hopefully in greater detail now. So you should now see the legend on the far right here that solar energy system ordinances have been added to the legend, with communities that regulate rooftop solar arrays in yellow, communities that regulate ground mounted arrays shown in blue, and communities that regulate both rooftop and ground mounted arrays in orange. And if you want to see specific information for a specific community based on the layer you have turned on, click on a specific community. I'm going to click on the town of Alton here. And doing so will bring up a pop-up box. And if it's not showing the layer you want, in this case, it's showing the Lakes Region Planning Commission border. It highlighted that. You simply need to click on the small arrow here in the bottom corner of the pop-up box until you get to the layer you were seeking information for. So now we have, should say, Solar Energy Systems Ordinance Alton at the top of the box. And it tells us that Alton has a Solar Energy Systems Ordinance and that they regulate both rooftop and ground-mounted solar arrays. So you could also find this information or get to the town of Alton or any town by simply going up to this magnifying glass in the upper right corner and typing in Alton. And that should zoom in on the community of Alton. You would then have to re-highlight that community, scroll back over to the layer that you want information on in the pop-up box, Solar Energy Systems Ordinance Alton, and you'll get to the same spot as well. If you can't just eyeball what community you want to look at from the larger state map. The other point to note at this point would be as well, a third option for looking at information for a specific community is by zooming into certain areas of the map. So those on this webinar that work for a regional planning commission may have realized that the boundaries correspond to your RPC boundaries. And so by clicking on this little 3 lines here in the upper left corner, if you click on that, you'll get this little little drop down list. And if you click on the 4th option down that says bookmarks, it's going to bring up another pop-up that says bookmarks. And if we scroll over, say we wanted to look, we're still in the town of Alton, and we want to look at what are the communities in the Lakes Region Planning Commission. Alton happens to be in the Lakes Region Planning Commission region. We could do that way too. The municipal names will turn on. You just have to zoom in a bit. They should then eventually turn on. Yeah, as you can now see, you should be able to see Alton's name now showing up. So the next step is what we're going to do is try to take this a step further and say, okay, I have found this map of solar energy systems ordinances. I want to try to, the goal was initially, remember, to try to locate communities that have these, to try to look at what is in another community solar energy systems ordinance. So while I don't have the exact link to Alton's solar energy ordinance, we can get that by simply going back to the layer list again. So we're going to click on the 3 lines again. We're going to this time click on the 3rd option down that says layers. We're going to go back into, we're going to scroll up on the layer list. We're going to expand the land use regulations documents tab. We're going to scroll down to zoning ordinance. We're going to turn the zoning ordinance layer on. So hopefully the zoning ordinance is on. Just to interrupt, we did have a question come in. Matt is asking, does it matter what browser you use? It shouldn't matter. I'm using Chrome, Google Chrome. I think does tend to work best, but the interactive map viewer should work in other browsers as well. So I'm not quite sure why, if you're in a different browser other than Chrome, it's not working. But so back to this, for those of you that are just following along with what I'm doing, we now click the town of Alton again, and we scroll over again in that little bottom right corner of the pop-up box. And this time now we're in zoning, it should say at the top of the pop-up box, zoning ordinance Alton. And now we click view. And again, I clicked view next to what said URL, the last row of that box. That took us to the Alton, New Hampshire zoning ordinance as amended March 10th, 2020. Now, I happen to know this will not work for every community, that Alton zoning ordinance is searchable as a PDF. So if you've opened that and I've entered in, if you open it, you've now opened it, and you press Control F on your computer or Command F on a Mac, should open the search box. And so if you enter solar energy systems, as I've done, it says solar energy systems are in section 363. So I click on that, and there I've now taken to Alton Solar Energy Systems Ordinance, where we now see the details about their ordinance, starting with their definitions about solar, and then talks about commercial versus utility scale, so on. I think there's a provision about, rooftop array. So you should be able to do that for any community in the state. As I mentioned, not all of the communities may have a searchable PDF for their zoning ordinance. You can also do that for any of the other land use documents, including capital improvement plans, driveway regulations, excavation regulations, historic district ordinances, master plans, site plan review regs, subdivision, wireless telecommunications ordinances. So that's a pretty powerful tool right there that I encourage you all to check out. Tool can just be a lot of fun. So now we're going to get to the second part of this kind of power of the survey, which is downloading a list of communities that have solar energy ordinances. So I'm going to paste the link. If you didn't get there already by going to the OSI MLUR page, I'll paste this link here. So if you go there, that should take you to the bottom of the municipal land use regulation page. This is what it should look like at the top. Again, with all the subject-specific tables detailed. And if you scroll down to the bottom, again, I said, as you can see, there's a lot of variables, 100 plus variables, I believe. We click on the last one here, Solar Energy Systems Ordinance, Excel workbook. Again, information is available in both Excel and CSV format. So if we click on this one and then you click on the box or the downloaded file, it may, depending on what browser you're using, show up in different parts. I'm using Chrome, so it's going to show up here on the bottom of the browser. If I go ahead and open that up, and I may need to stop sharing my screen. So you should now be able to see the downloaded list of solar energy systems ordinances for every community. It gives you where it also gives you information. So it gives you municipal name, county, what regional planning commission, the community region that community is in, whether they have all of these communities are going to be true. They have a solar energy systems ordinance, and then if they do regulate rooftop solar arrays, it's going to say true. If not, it'll say false. Same for ground mounted solar arrays. So that is how to download a file from one of the subject specific tables. We're going to go back now to the presentation. Sorry to jump around here, folks. We're going to talk about how to print a map. So let me just get back to my part. So we're going to turn back, as I said, to the interactive map viewer. This is what it would look like in the final format, what it should look like. Nice statewide map. So if you want to do that interactive map, it's actually very easy. All you have to do is So if we're back in our interactive map, we zoomed in, so we're going to go, you should already be at the state level, unless you zoomed in on a specific area like I did. But okay, so we've zoomed back to the state level. So what you're going to do, and we just want to have solar. So we're going to turn off, if you just want to have solar energy ordinances shown, you're going to need to turn off the zoning ordinance layer. So I'm back in the layers list. In the drop down under expanded the land use regulation documents tab, we're going to click the I again that says zoning ordinance. That'll turn that off. We now are just showing the solar ordinances. So if we click on that upper left hand corner with the 3 lines, we're going to bring the drop down and we're going to click on print. Click the print button. Then we're going to change the title to Solar Energy Systems Ordinance. We're going to go to change the page setup to A4 Portrait. Why that works, but it does. Make sure the file format is a PDF for best exporting. And then you're going to click Export. Give the computer a second to think and do its thing. For some reason, I will maybe come back to this in a second, but in the interest of time, it is, I did just test it right before the webinar, so I know it does work. And maybe because I'm in presentation mode here, that it's not wanting to show me that the slide has exported. But let me see if I have this in my downloads. I do not, I'm sorry. So unfortunately, I cannot show you the end result. You saw it on the slide of what it would look like. But so just to wrap up now, again, that's what the export would look like. So just to wrap up, thank you for joining me for today's webinar about the results of the 2019-2020 Municipal Land Use Regulation Survey. If you have any additional questions that I didn't answer during the webinar, please enter them in the chat box. I know we're coming up against the 1 o'clock time frame. We did have answered some questions. I'm willing to stay on for a little longer if folks do have other questions. I will post this deck for us to download. So I did send the PDF to everybody who signed up for the webinar prior to the webinar. So you should have the slides already. I'm happy to send them out again. I will also post them on the Municipal Land Use Regulations Survey page, which I'll put the URL for again. And we will eventually, we're working on, creating a OSI planning YouTube channel to update recordings of webinars for this and future webinars. And I guess that's a good lead-in for that. We're going to be trying to be doing more webinars in the beginning of 2021. So please stay tuned. If you have additional questions that I didn't answer today or more specific questions, feel free to reach out to me at my phone number and email shown on the slide, noah.hodgetts@osi.nh.gov or at 271-2157. I am working remotely, but that'll go forward right to my cell phone. I did see 1 or 2 other questions here, so let me just see. There's a lot of thank yous. The guest that says, do you have recommendations on how to use this data to determine a town's fair share of affordable housing? That is the million-dollar question. I do happen to do a lot of housing policy work, and kind of other part of my job at OSI. In terms of using the Municipal Land Use Regulation Survey work for fair share analysis, the only part of the survey that really speaks to fair share analysis regarding affordable housing would be what communities have a workforce housing ordinance, and what communities may have inclusionary zoning. However, that doesn't really speak to what communities have, how many units are affordable or not. That would be require a separate analysis, which this survey does not provide data for. OSI does have data on the total number of housing units permitted per year by a community, which I'll put a link to that. We're going to be releasing the data on the 2019 housing unit permits by municipality, hopefully actually by the end of this week. This is the link to the 2018 report. People are curious. So stay tuned for that. We're actually going to be hopefully doing a webinar in January about the results of the 2019 housing unit report that I said we're going to be putting out at the end of this week. So with that, if there's no other questions, I'm going to end this webinar at this time. And again, folks, if you have other questions, feel more than free to follow up with me via email or phone. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and have a great rest of your day.